actually a gold digger, but just want to start off with that. Okay, so my talk is called We All Started Somewhere. And for those of you who came here to learn about code or to be better at your job, unfortunately, I'm going to disappoint you because my talk is not technical. And I'm also going to disappoint you because my talk is actually not about React either. And I asked the organizers whether it has to be about React, and they said React or the ecosystem. I don't think it fits under either of those buckets. So I'm going to, instead of asking for permission, I'm going to ask for forgiveness after the talk. Instead, this talk is going to be kind of a story and a journey that I want to share with you that I really care about. Just to get started, my name is Preethi Kasireddy, and I'm currently doing a lot of indie blockchain development work. Previously, I was a software engineer at Coinbase, which is a cryptocurrency company. Before that, I was a venture capitalist at Andreessen Horowitz. Before that, I was an analyst at Goldman Sachs, and before that, I was an engineer at Abbott Labs. If there's one other bullet I had to choose about myself, it's that I love writing, and I teach by writing, and so if any of you know me, it might be through my blog. So just to get started, I want you to think back to the first time that you ever tried to write code, that very first time. When you opened a computer and you wrote a piece of code, like that exact time, place, and moment. And think back to that time of like what motivated you to get started, what were you trying to achieve? Like, why did you want to write that piece of code? And what did it actually feel like to write that first piece of code? Did any of you have that like magic moment where your world just turned upside down and your mind just started to race? And at that point, you probably got really into programming because of that magic moment that you had. And then from then on, you might have taken a traditional approach and maybe gone through like tutorials, books, gotten a CS degree, whatever it is. Or you might have been more of a hacker mentality and just started fiddling with code and just building stuff. But something got you into programming, right? And I want you to put yourself in those shoes as a beginner. And now I want you to think back to that time when the very first time you had an idea that you want to build something. Maybe it was your first application, or maybe it was your first game, or maybe it was your first website for your grandma or something. Whatever it is, you had this idea and you probably got really excited because you wanted to build it. And then you went to actually build it. And how did that feel? Was it super easy and you just kind of breezed through it? Or did you struggle a little bit? Did you get a little bit stuck here and there? Did you ever have that moment where you knew exactly what you wanted, but you had no idea where to start and you were totally lost? Or what was required to make that happen? And how did that make you feel? Were you frustrated, aggravated ever? Maybe you're one of those people who spent a lot of time going through books. You learned HTML, you learned CSS, you learned JavaScript, you learned about classes, you learned about conditional logic, but you were kind of struggling to put all these pieces together and actually build something real. And I want you to just put yourself in those shoes when you were just a super beginner, just getting started and going through these initial struggles that you have. Okay, past that beginner phase, all of you obviously got through that phase. And you probably, at one point, decided to get your first programming job. You were like, I'm ready to take the next step. I'm ready to get paid doing this. And I want you to think back to that time you tried to get your first programming gig, whatever it was. Do you remember trying to convince someone to give you a job with no experience? And do you remember trying to create a resume with 0 experience on your resume? How much did you have to fake it? And how many places did you have to apply before someone was willing to give you a chance? Somehow you managed to have to convince someone that with 0 experience, they should hire you as a programmer, right? And it was probably kind of frustrating and sometimes heartbreaking. Did you ever have a moment where you just felt like a fraud? Where somehow you're manipulating the world to believe that you know how to code, but you have no idea how to code? And then think back to that time that you've got your first ever programming interview. Did you totally walk in like a macho man and fly with passing colors? Or were you a nervous wreck and kind of made a fool of yourself, at least in your head? And did you ever kind of feel intimidated or dumb in front of an interviewer because you messed up a question? I'm asking you to bring these feelings back because these are feelings that beginners have every single day as they're going through their programming journey. And I know this because I was a beginner too, and I've had all these feelings when I was getting started. And I was actually a beginner not too long ago. It was just 2 years ago. Here's how my personal story went. So 4 years ago, I was working at Andreessen Horowitz, and honestly, life was pretty great. I was working with some of the smartest people in the world, venture capitalists like Mark Andreessen, Chris Dixon, and so forth. I was doing, honestly, one of the most intellectually and emotionally stimulating jobs I've ever had. And every day, I would meet with some of the best entrepreneurs in the world who were building their dreams. And so day in and day out, I would meet with entrepreneurs who were out there coding and building technical teams around them, working with engineers and building products. People like Ben and Moise Urtsky, who were building DigitalOcean to disrupt how you deploy code. People like Stuart Butterfield, who are building Slack to disrupt how you do messaging. Or people like Jonah Peretti at BuzzFeed, who was trying to disrupt media. Just like the list goes on, all these amazing entrepreneurs. And as a venture capitalist, my job is to look for these kinds of really brilliant technical engineers and technical entrepreneurs, because that's what we believed at Andreessen Horowitz. We wanted to find the engineers who were trying to be entrepreneurs. And so I'd be on places like Product Hunt, and I'd see all these engineers who were building their applications and putting it out in the world, and just so excited to share it with the world because they were trying to solve some problem. And it was really fun watching it all, but over time, I started to get a little bit jealous because I wanted to have the skills to build too. And I had applications that I had dreamed of building, but I just didn't know how to build them because I didn't know how to code at that time. And that feeling of just watching other people build tormented me for a long time. And I was like, you know what, fuck it, I'm gonna teach myself how to code. And it was hard. I failed multiple times. I started with Python the first time. I gave up after 2 weeks, and it was just I was busy with work, I couldn't really focus on it, it was kind of hard. And tried again a couple months later. That time I was a little bit more persistent, but I gave up after 5 weeks. I just kept trying, and something wasn't clicking. I just wasn't getting there. And so I started to have a lot of self-doubt, and I'm like, maybe I'm not smart enough. Maybe I'm not as smart as I thought. After all, there's thousands of programmers here who code every day, but I can't seem to do it. So it must mean I'm just not smart. And so every time I go to the computer and learn to code, I'd honestly just dread it. I didn't like it. And I was like, maybe coding isn't for me, actually. Maybe this is not something I was meant to do. Until JavaScript. And it sounds funny, but JavaScript literally changed my life. It was my gateway drug to programming. And I never felt like that before. The feelings I got when I was just typing HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and then refreshing the browser and seeing the result right away. I think the magical thing was it made me feel like a creator. It made me feel like a builder to get that immediate feedback loop in the browser. And at that point, I just became hooked. I was unstoppable. I just became obsessed with it. I remember I literally didn't show up to work for a week because I was just learning how to code. And I was just going through tutorials, going through books, going through all these online courses. I had this adrenaline rush as a beginner and this honeymoon phase as a beginner. And that honeymoon phase probably lasted about a week or two. And then when I wanted to go beyond building those tutorials and actually build something, build my dream application, I hit this really big inner crisis. It was this giant wall standing in between me and the application I wanted to build. I don't know why, but every little thing as a beginner would crush me. I remember getting an error in the console, and I didn't really know what it meant. And I think it's because I wasn't used to the technical jargon yet. And I asked my ex-boyfriend at the time, hey, I don't know what this means. And he's like, you should learn how to look on Stack Overflow. That's what developers do, learn how to Google stuff. And I was on Stack Overflow, spinning my wheels. I was reading the answers over and over again, not really understanding what they were saying. I think at the time I didn't even have enough points to ask a question or something on Stack Overflow. So it was kind of frustrating. And then, unlike now, like if I get an error now, I'll just go straight to the source code, I'll figure it out, I can look at source code and not be intimidated. Back then, like as a beginner, who looks at source code, right? That's kind of intimidating. So I'd sit there just hoping someone on the internet had the answer, and sometimes they did, and a lot of times they didn't, so that I'd just like be stuck. And honestly, getting through these struggles as a beginner is such a trained muscle. You grow this kind of muscle over time, and at some point, it doesn't even feel like a struggle. It just becomes your day-to-day. This is what programmers do, right? This is our day-to-day. But as a beginner, you don't have these muscles. You don't have this muscle memory to just figure stuff out. And that's why when I was going through that stage, I just felt like pretty alone and pretty scared, because I was scared that I'd give up again. And that would be the worst thing. And it was like, I remember I would look up to people like Guillermo, who's building Xi, or like Paul Irish, or Addy Osmani, or Dan Abramov, and I'd like dream to be like them. They were like my programming gods at the time. And honestly, I'm not the only one who struggled as a beginner, right? Like every day I get emails from beginners who like are struggling to learn, who are struggling to become a builder, but there's something is stopping them. They're not getting there. And I'll just give you a few examples of quotes that I've gotten in emails. Just 4 of like the hundreds I've gotten. So this person's like, my biggest frustration is not being able to learn the concepts clearly and not remembering them. I end up with failures. Learning JavaScript, ES6, and React feels like it's going to take an entire lifetime. Please help. This person says, my problem is, however, that I feel very stuck in the middle. Every time I try to leap into a project, I don't really know where to begin. I'm unsure of how to structure large-scale code and basically how to get past this barrier I feel stuck behind. I was wondering if you can give some insight into what your learning process was. This person said, when I'm stuck at a point in a project, it sometimes seems as though I've not achieved anything when I sit down to code. This person says, I really want to thank you, blah, blah, blah. I struggle with how to go about it, what resources I need, websites to refer, which languages to start from, and what languages do I need to learn. My end goal is to have a boutique website or app development agency or have a successful coding job. And these are just 4, right? I get like a lot of these. They really want to become builders, but something is stopping them. All over the world, even from Brazil. And the point is not to point out these beginners and say, oh, they're struggling, maybe they're not meant to code, or whatever it is. The point is that we were actually all in these shoes at some point or another. Some struggled less, some struggled more, but we were all in those shoes. It's just that we forget, because we get good, and we forget what those feelings felt like. And even some of the world's best programmers had these feelings too. So who knows TJ? He's like called the 10x programmer, and everyone knows him as the 10x programmer, and he's like my programming god. And I was asking him to tell me about a time he was a beginner, and he was so humble, and he was like, I was awful for a long time, actually. In general, I've been the fake it till you make it type. If you're confident, companies trust you, and then you can grow your skills along the way. But I definitely think anyone can easily get to where I am at. It just takes time. I only learned by doing too, so just build a lot. Another person who I look up to is Addy Osmani. If you read any of his stuff, you would think that he knows every little thing about JavaScript, basically. And he wasn't embarrassed to admit that when he was a beginner, he made the mistake of thinking that parse int string equals nat would be true, and he said he was spinning his wheels going through that error for a long time as a beginner. But he made it through somehow. But these kinds of mistakes are ones that beginners actually are the ones that get stuck on, and they sometimes just don't make it through. Even machine learning experts who seem like gods of the world struggle too, right? So these are 2 machine learning experts who I really look up to. They work at Google Brain, and they're like, I failed to learn programming 5 times. And the other one was like, I still don't know how to program properly. And they're Google Brain residents, which is like the top-notch machine learning program in the world. But somehow, every one of these people found their way, right? They made it through. And now, so they're some of the best programmers in the industry. And even for me, fast forward 2 years, and I found my way too. I mean, it wasn't easy. Like, I went through many nights of struggles and just pushing through and being persistent. But every little error I ran into, every Stack Overflow post I read, every bug I had to figure out, every documentation I read, every interview I failed or got, all these pieces added up over time and made me who I am today. And it helped me advance as a developer every single day. And then I ended up getting my first contracting gig, then my first full-time job, second full-time job, co-founded a company. Now I'm back to development day to day. I've kind of discovered my identity and strengths as a programmer. And look at me, for God's sake, I'm up here giving an opening presentation at React Rally. So what's the difference between all these programmers who are failing or struggling as beginners and people like Addy, TJ, me, and all of you who made it through? I think I can at least speak for myself. Unlike when I was a beginner, what I have now is that I have the confidence that I can build anything. And it's not because I know everything, it's because I pushed through all those hard times, and in the end, I learned how to learn, which I think is one of the most important skills as a programmer, or if you learn anything as a programmer, that is the skill to learn. And every beginner just needs to get to that phase to become confident. But they're failing to get to that point of where they just know how to learn. And the worst part is I see a lot of potential in a lot of these people who email me or who I talk to, but they're struggling, they're really struggling. And there's, of course, exceptions, right? There's people who just are not trying hard enough, or they're not willing to put the time, or they just have poor analytical skills, whatever it is. But I'm talking about the people who have potential, but who are still struggling. And they would probably wish to be in my shoes or your shoes, because I know I did 2 years ago. So I thought back, I was like, okay, so what made me successful? And like, I think I would point to 3 things. One is that I was very passionate about it. I told you I had that magic moment, and ever since then I felt like a builder, a creator, and I wanted this so badly that I wasn't gonna let anything stop me. I was just like so into it at the time. I still am, but. Second, I was persistent. I think this is just something I've always been. I'm very stubborn, so I hate the idea of giving up. But being passionate about something made it almost like impossible not to be persistent, because I just wanted it so bad that I was very persistent and I wasn't gonna let anything stop me. But most importantly, it was the people. I was surrounded by amazing mentors and people who believed in me. I had a network of people, including my friends, my colleagues at Andreessen Horowitz, random people on the internet, all who had faith in me and who saw potential, and they're willing to give me this lending hand and show that they cared and show that they wanted me to succeed. And then that belief that they had in me gave me a lot of inner faith, a lot of inner strength, and most importantly, it gave me confidence that I could do this. And that made a world of a difference. As Guillermo always says, it's so important to have people that bet on you early on. So my proposal to you is that you have the power to help create another TJ, another Addy, another Dan, another me, right in your hands. You have the capacity to give them hope that they're capable, instill confidence in them, give them advice when they have no idea where to turn. Write about annoying errors or bugs or things that you ran into as a beginner so that they don't have to spin their wheels going through the same things. Retweet them if they say something interesting to help them grow their network and make them more visible in the community, which helps a lot, actually. Like Kent Dodd does, make beginner-friendly PRs for your open source projects. Really, there's like a million ways you can help. And I'd say there's 2 buckets of how you can help and be a mentor. One is you can do more one-on-one stuff. I personally I know Jameson Dans is one of my mentors, and this is where you can provide the maximum value because it's personalized, it's direct, and you're answering the questions right away. But the problem with this is that it's less scalable. You can only do a couple of these a month, realistically. The other approach is you can do one-to-many. So this is like you're collectively helping people answering much more general and common questions. This is much more scalable. I know Kent does something interesting with an AMA, and he has like common questions and a GitHub wiki. I really like that. I've seen a lot of people start to do live Twitch streams and live coding, which I think is super cool and super helpful for beginners. You can do live YouTube Q&A, live YouTube coding. There's a lot of ways to do the one-to-many approach. Personally, I started something called the Ask Preethi series. It sounds kind of weird, but basically what I do is I answer common programming struggles that people have. And honestly, all I'm doing in these videos is just talking about my approach to thinking about these questions that they went through. And I'm just being vulnerable. I'm telling them that, hey, I was a beginner, I was in your shoes too, and here's how I thought about it. And I'm just sharing my personal experience, and it's shown that it's been enough to motivate thousands of people. And I really like Henry's response to my tweet the other day, where he said, and even though it's awkward, I kind of think not continually telling people I don't know what I'm doing actually hurts the projects I do. We expect that others must know what they're talking about. We don't want to encourage a genius myth. We actually need the help of a community. So it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to admit that you were once a beginner. Just because you're good now doesn't mean you weren't once a beginner. Because beginners love hearing that. It gives them confidence. It gives them confidence that they're not the only ones struggling, that there's not this genius myth, and that they have a chance to. And so I'll give you proof that this works because, again, I don't do much in these videos except talk about my experience. And my first video got 34,000 views. Second one got 24,000 views. Third one got 20,000 views. And all I'm doing in these videos is talking about how I thought about these questions. I'm just giving them guidance. I'm not spoon-feeding them, but instead I'm trying to instill confidence in them. So what are some counter-arguments you might have for why you might not want to do this, like help beginners? One you might say is, like, I simply don't care. And honestly, that's totally fine. There's a lot of really good programmers out there who are really good, and they just want to build stuff, and they don't really care about helping beginners, and that's totally fine, because we need a lot of programmers to build amazing stuff for the world, so go focus on that if you don't care. Another counter-argument you might have is, I just don't have enough time. And that's totally legitimate, because we all have really busy lives, and I know some of you even have like wives, husbands, and children, which I don't know how you do. But I'll kind of talk about my process for how I go through these Ask Preethi series, even though I'm pretty busy myself. So I get a lot of these emails, and I don't read all of them because I don't have time. So I'll just read the ones that catch my eye. And if I like a question, I'll just start jotting down my answer, like while I'm in an Uber, or while I'm walking home from the gym, or while I'm in the line at a grocery store. Just random times that I'd be on Twitter anyway, I just like write these things down. And then when I'm happy with my answer a few days later, I'll come to my computer, I'll open QuickTime, I'll do the recording, anywhere between 5 to 20 minutes, and I promise myself no re-records, because then it's going to be a burden. Then I'm going to try to perfect it, and then it's going to just become work, and I don't want it to be work. I just want it to be something I'm doing for fun, and something I'm doing to help people. And so total time on the computer is 30 minutes per video, and I did 3 videos. That's an hour and a half, and almost 100,000 views. So you definitely have time if you really wanted to. The last thing you might say is, I have nothing to offer. And I'm going to just call BS on that because it's absolutely not true. You have a lot more to offer than you think. For example, just think of one thing that you're really good at. And think about how you can share that with the world. Maybe write a blog post, maybe tweet about it. Just give it away. Just give it away to the world. Share that knowledge. And then see how good it feels when someone thanks you for that. Because at that point, you'll all of a sudden feel like you have a lot to share. Everything will just come easy. You'll realize that you do have a lot to offer, because you do. So in conclusion, I hope you realize how much power you have at every moment to change someone's life forever. As a successful developer, which you all are, what you say and what you do to help the rising stars really, really does matter. You could help in making of the next TJ, the next Paul Ayers, the next Dan, the next Guillermo, the next me, or like, who knows, right? So ready, set, go instill some confidence. That's it.